On my 68th Thanksgiving, I set the table for 9 people. I bought 2 pies from the bakery on Elm Street, 1 pecan, 1 pumpkin. I made the green bean casserole from scratch, the way my wife used to make it, with the crispy onions on top. I'd been up since 6 in the morning. The turkey went in at 7. By noon, the whole house smelled like it used to smell when she was still alive, when this place was full of noise and kids running down the hall. Nobody came. Not my son, not his wife, not my 2 grandchildren. I sat at the table for about 20 minutes. Just sat there. The candles were lit. I'd actually lit candles. I don't know why. Some habit from years of doing this the right way. Then I picked up my phone. My son had posted a photo 40 minutes earlier, the 5 of them, him, his wife Renee, both kids, and her parents, at a steakhouse downtown. The caption said, "Finally, real quality time." Grateful for this crew, I read it 3 times. I blew out the candles, covered the food with foil, and went to sit in the garage in my truck. Not to go anywhere, just to sit somewhere that didn't have a set table in it. That was the night I started paying attention. My name is Dale Whitmore. I'm 68 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. My wife Carolyn passed 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to gone. We had 1 son, Miles. He's 41 now. Miles was a good kid. I want to say that because it's true, and because what I'm going to tell you doesn't erase who he was when he was young. He was the kind of boy who brought his friends home for dinner, who called his mother on her birthday, who cried at her funeral without being embarrassed about it. But somewhere in the years after Carolyn died, something shifted. I'm not sure if it was Renee, or the money pressure, or just the slow creep of people getting comfortable taking things for granted. I don't know. I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I still don't have a clean answer. What I can tell you is what happened, the facts of it. The numbers. About 8 months after Carolyn's funeral, Miles called and said they were in trouble. Renee had stopped working after their second kid was born, and Miles's company had done a round of layoffs. He wasn't laid off, but his hours got cut. They were behind on the mortgage, a house they bought at the top of the market in 2019, more house than they needed, in a neighborhood they couldn't quite afford. 2 car payments, credit card debt they hadn't told me about. He asked if I could help with 3 months of mortgage payments while he got back on his feet. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. Carolyn would have said yes. That's not even a question. The 3 months became 6. By the end of the year, I had put in $19,000. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself the same thing I think a lot of parents tell themselves, that I was helping my family stabilize, that this would pass, that they'd get back on track, and eventually we'd all look back on this rough patch like it was a small thing. It did not pass. The next year, Miles called about the car. Renee's minivan needed a transmission, about $4,000 the shop said. Not worth fixing on a vehicle that old. So they needed a different car. Miles asked if I could co-sign on a loan. I said I'd rather just buy them a used one outright so they didn't have another monthly payment. I found a clean 2017 Honda Pilot with 54,000 miles. Paid $11,000. 2 months after that, Renee's parents came to visit from out of state and stayed for 3 weeks. During that visit, Miles pulled me aside and told me they were thinking of adding a room to the house. The kids were sharing a bedroom. There wasn't enough space. The estimate was about $30,000. He asked if I could contribute half. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for a week, and then I wrote the check for $15,000. I told myself it was for the grandkids. That's what I kept telling myself. It's for the grandkids. I want to be clear about something. I was not a rich man. I was comfortable. I had my pension, my Social Security, savings from 30 years of being careful. Carolyn and I had always lived below our means. We drove used cars. We didn't take expensive vacations. We put money away every month. When she died, I had about $400,000 in savings and a house that was paid off. That savings account had a very different number in it by the time that Thanksgiving came around. Over 5 years, I had given or loaned. I say loaned loosely because there was never a repayment conversation that lasted more than 2 minutes. A total of just over $112,000 to my son and his family. Mortgage payments. The car. The room addition. Medical bills when Renee had a procedure that their insurance didn't fully cover. A family trip to Florida they said they'd pay me back for. School supplies. Christmas presents for the kids that I bought because Miles said they were tight that month. A laptop for my older grandchild. Groceries twice when Miles said the account was overdrawn. $112,000. I didn't know the total until I sat down and went through my bank statements that November, after the Thanksgiving with the empty table and the steakhouse photo. I had a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee that went cold, and I just added it all up line by line. It took 2 hours. I kept thinking I must be making a mistake. I went back and rechecked. I wasn't making a mistake. What struck me almost more than the number was the pattern. The calls always came at a bad moment, a holiday weekend or Sunday evening, or right before I was about to leave on a trip to visit my brother out in Colorado. The asks were always framed as temporary, always came with a rough timeline that was never honored, and in between the asks, there was a kind of warmth that, now that I was looking at it clearly, seemed to evaporate the minute the check cleared. I don't like saying that, but it was true. The dinners I was invited to were usually the ones where a bill needed to be paid. The phone calls that started with, "Hey Dad, how are you doing?" usually ended with a number. The visits where my grandchildren ran to hug me almost always coincided with a new request. I started to feel like a vending machine that also had to seem grateful for being used. That winter, I didn't say anything. I kept being invited to things. Christmas dinner, my older grandchild's school concert. And I went, and I smiled, and I watched my son laugh at the table, and I tried to remember who we used to be. In January, I called my attorney. Not to do anything dramatic. I just wanted to understand my options. We talked for about an hour. He asked me some questions I didn't expect. Whether I had documented the transfers, whether any of it was in writing. Most of it wasn't. He suggested I start keeping records going forward. He also said, quietly, at the end of the call, "Dale, $112,000 is a significant portion of a retirement. You're 68. Long-term care costs in this state average $80,000 a year. You should be thinking about your own financial security." I sat with that for a few days. In February, Miles called. They were looking at refinancing the house, and the lender was asking about a gift letter for some of the money I'd given them. Apparently, it needed to be documented. Miles said it would help if I wrote a letter stating that the money was a gift, not a loan, so it didn't affect their debt-to-income ratio. I told him I'd have to think about it. He called back 2 days later. Then Renee called. She was pleasant about it, but firm. They really needed the letter. The refinance was time-sensitive. She said she was sure I understood how important it was for the family. I told her I'd be in touch. I wasn't angry in that moment. I was something quieter than angry. I was just clear. The kind of clear you get when the fog has been lifting slowly for months, and then one morning you wake up and you can see all the way to the tree line. I talked to my attorney again. We updated my will. I adjusted the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts. I changed my financial power of attorney to my brother out in Colorado, someone I trusted completely, someone who had never asked me for a thing. I did not write the gift letter. Miles called twice more about it. The second time, he raised his voice a little, said I was making things harder than they needed to be, that this was a simple thing and he didn't understand why I was dragging my feet. I let him talk. When he was done, I said I loved him and I'd talk to him soon. Then I called my financial advisor and we started restructuring things, moved a portion of assets into an annuity, made sure certain accounts had proper protections. She asked me, without prying, if everything was okay. I said it would be. I did not cut off contact. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't making a dramatic gesture. I didn't send a letter or give a speech. I just stopped being available financially. When the next ask came, and it came in April, something about Renee's car needing brakes and tires, I said I was sorry. I wasn't in a position to help right now. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" Miles said. "I mean, I can't help with that right now," I said. Another pause. "Is something wrong with your finances?" "Nothing's wrong," I said. "I'm just being more careful." He didn't know what to do with that. We talked for another few minutes about nothing in particular, and then he had to go. The invitation slowed down after that. I noticed. The Sunday check-in calls that had never been very consistent became even less consistent. My older grandchild's birthday came and I sent a card and a gift in the mail, bought it myself, wrapped it myself, mailed it myself the way a grandfather should be able to do. I got a text from Miles saying thanks. That was it. I joined a hiking club that spring. There's a group of about 15 people, mostly retirees, that meets on Saturday mornings and does trail walks in the county parks. Nothing strenuous. I'm 68, not 28. but it got me out of the house. I started knowing people's names, and they started knowing mine. A man named Stuart and I started having coffee after the walks, just talking. He'd lost his wife a few years back, too. We talked about the particular silence of a house that used to be full. In the summer, I drove out to Colorado and spent 3 weeks with my brother. His name is Ray. He's 72, still sharp, lives on 10 acres outside of Pueblo with his wife and 2 dogs and a garden that is frankly ridiculous in the best possible way. We sat on his porch most evenings and watched the sun go behind the mountains. He knew some of what was going on. I told him the rest. He listened. He didn't offer me advice until I asked for it. When I asked, he said, "You raised your boy the best you knew how. What he does with that is on him now." That was enough. When I got back home in August, there was a message from Miles. He said he wanted to talk, that things had been distant lately and he didn't understand why, and could we get together? We met at a diner near my house. A Tuesday afternoon, quiet, not crowded. He got there before me and was sitting in a booth when I walked in. He looked tired. I noticed that. I also noticed he'd lost a little weight. We made small talk for a few minutes. "How are the kids? How's the house?" "Fine, fine, fine." Then he said, "Dad, I feel like something's wrong between us and I can't figure out what it is." I looked at him. He was my son, 41 years old, and I could still see the 10-year-old in his face if I looked for it. "Miles," I said, "I love you. I want to be clear about that before I say anything else." "Okay," he said, "but I've been doing some thinking this past year, and I've realized I haven't been honest. Not with you, and not with myself. I've been giving in ways that weren't sustainable for me, and I wasn't honest about that because I thought it was what a good father did. I don't think that anymore." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is this about the gift letter?" "It's about $112,000 over 5 years, I said. The number landed. I watched it land. He opened his mouth and then closed it again. "I'm not saying it to make you feel bad," I said. "I'm saying it because I think we both need to see it clearly. I gave what I gave because I wanted to help, and somewhere along the way I think we both started treating it as something you were entitled to. That's not your fault entirely. It's mine too. I let it happen." He stared at his coffee cup. "I didn't realize it was that much." "I know," I said. And I believed him, partly, not entirely, but partly. We talked for about 90 minutes. It wasn't a perfect conversation. He got defensive a couple of times. There was a moment where he brought up Carolyn, said she would have wanted him helped, and I had to take a breath before I responded, because that one stung. I told him his mother would have wanted him to stand on his own feet, which is also true. He didn't ask for money that day. Whether that was because he'd heard me or because he could tell it wasn't going to work, I'm not sure. We hugged in the parking lot before we left. It was a real hug, not a polite one. That meant something to me. Things are different now. Not fixed. Different. Now, not fixed. Different. Miles calls more regularly than he did during the years of the asks, which is strange, and maybe says something I don't want to think about too hard. Renee is polite, but there's a distance there that I don't think is going away anytime soon. I see my grandchildren on holidays. I drive to their school events when I'm invited, which is not always, but sometimes. I sent my older grandchild a savings bond for his birthday, started one for the younger one too. I set it up so they'll have access to it when they're adults. Their parents don't know the details. That's intentional. Whatever happened with Miles and me, those kids didn't choose any of this, and they deserve to know their grandfather thought about their future. Last Thanksgiving, I drove out to Ray's place in Colorado. His wife made a turkey that was genuinely better than anything I've ever cooked. We sat around a table that was loud and warm and a little chaotic. Their kids and grandkids coming and going, football on the television, someone's kid spilling apple cider, and everyone laughing about it. I thought about the year before, the pecan pie, the lit candles, the garage. I did not feel sorry for myself. I felt grateful, not in a performative way, but in the quiet way that comes when you understand what you almost lost. Not the money, not even the relationship, though that too. I mean myself. The version of me that knew his own worth, that didn't need to buy his place at a table. My financial advisor says I'm in better shape than she expected given the last 5 years. We've rebuilt some of what I gave away. I won't have everything I planned for, but I'll have enough. Enough to live decently, to visit Ray when I want, to take the hiking group out for breakfast every now and then, to send those savings bonds every year on schedule. Stuart from the hiking club. We've become real friends now. His daughter is getting married next spring, and he invited me to the wedding. I said I'd be there. That means something. Not because it's traumatic, but because it isn't. It's just a person who knows me, inviting me somewhere because he wants me there. No calculation, no favor being set up. Just a friend saying, come, be part of this. I'm 68 years old. I have a paid-off house and a pension and 2 dogs I adopted from the county shelter last spring. A pair of older mutts nobody else wanted, which felt appropriate. They sleep at the foot of the bed, and they do not ask me for anything except a walk in the morning and something to eat. I don't have everything I thought I'd have at this age. But I have something I didn't have. 2 years ago, I have a clear picture of what my life actually is, without the fog of trying to be needed. That's not nothing. Some days it feels like everything. I've thought a lot about what I would tell a younger version of myself if I could. Not just about the money, though the money is real, and $112,000 is not an abstraction, but about the slower, quieter damage that happens when you stop being honest with yourself about what's actually going on. For a long time, I told myself I was being a good father, and I think, in the early days, I was. When Miles called that first time, when he was genuinely struggling, saying yes was the right thing, Carolyn would have said yes. I'd say yes again. But somewhere in the years that followed, being a good father became a story I kept telling myself, so I didn't have to see what the situation had actually turned into. That's not generosity anymore. That's avoidance, wearing generosity's clothes. What I've come to understand, and this took me longer than I'd like to admit, is that the choices we make over time build something, not in any mystical sense, just in the plain, practical sense that actions have consequences, and patterns become structures, and structures become the reality you live in. I kept saying yes, so the asking kept coming. I kept not naming what was happening, so nobody in that dynamic ever had to reckon with it. I built the situation as much as anyone else did. That's a hard thing to sit with, but it's true. The morning I sat down with that yellow legal pad and added up 5 years of bank statements, I wasn't just looking at numbers. I was looking at a record of every time I'd chosen comfort over clarity. Every time I'd told myself it was temporary when I knew it probably wasn't. Every time I'd let a conversation end without saying the thing I actually needed to say. The money was just what that cost. What Miles did, or didn't do, is his to carry. I'm not in the business of deciding what lessons other people need to learn. But what I did, or didn't do, that's mine. And I think the only way to come out of something like this with any real integrity is to be honest about your own part in it. Not to punish yourself, just to see it. The other thing I've learned is that dignity is not something other people give you. I spent years trying to earn my place in my son's life by funding it. I thought that was love. Maybe part of it was, but part of it was also a deep fear of being irrelevant, of being the old man nobody needed anymore, and that fear cost me more than the money did. What I have now, the hiking group, the Saturday mornings with Stuart, those 3 weeks on Ray's porch watching the sun go behind the mountains, none of that costs anything. Nobody is there because I wrote them a check, and because of that, when I'm in those places, I know exactly where I stand. That is not a small thing. At 68 years old, after everything, knowing exactly where you stand is just about the most valuable thing there is.